My name's Vanessa, and a fun fact would be I've recently set up a BAME Family Lawyers Network. So the network is for Black and ethnic minority family lawyers, just because we're massively underrepresented in the family law space. Safe space to me is somewhere where you can share your truth, your story without judgment, somewhere where you can be vulnerable, and somewhere where you can receive encouragement and also share encouragement with others. So it was my first time in a corporate professional space, and I was a junior in the role. So we didn't have a set structure. We worked alongside a supervisor daily. We would move around to different departments and different teams, but everything, it was so varied. You could do anything from drafting to advising clients, but the main thing was you were there to learn because you were a junior. The company had decided to set up an office overseas, and I was super blessed to have a mentor in that company at the time. So we thought it would be a good idea if I could put a proposal forward to have a secondment in that office. So I made a whole proposal plan, business plan, composed an email. My my mentor at the time, so he was a Black man, he took me through the business plan. He was happy with it, and essentially I then sent it off to the senior manager. Now, for any kind of proposal, it had to be signed off by this senior manager of the company. So I sent it off and didn't hear anything back. So days went by, weeks went by, and it was pretty much radio silence. So I thought, okay, let me just pop into the senior manager's office just to ask, okay, have you received the email? Have you seen it? Have you acknowledged it? Anything, because he hadn't even acknowledged it. So I went into his office, and he was really friendly, and we'd always been on pretty good terms anyway. And he just said, "Yeah, Vanessa, come in, sit down." So I pretty much just asked him, I sent you this email a few weeks ago. I haven't received anything back. And he just said, "Oh yeah, that email." And then suddenly his tone just changed. And then he said to me, "Oh, by the way, I've received some feedback on you." So I thought, okay, I had nothing, there was nothing I was concerned about. And then he just said, "Oh, it was actually quite surprising. It was actually quite shocking because I'd always considered you to be someone that's friendly." So I thought, okay, like, what is this feedback? And he basically said to me, "Oh, I've received feedback off the back of the email that I sent, saying that I had a really bad attitude. And because of that, they're now going to be monitoring me in the company." So I literally was like, what? Like, in the meeting, just because I was so blindsided. Like, I went into that meeting just to ask if he had seen the email. I didn't expect him to come out with, "Oh, I have bad attitude and this is what I've heard about you, X, Y, Z." So I literally just said to him, like, I'm shocked. And he said to me, he's shocked as well. So on that basis, they'll be monitoring me now. So I pretty much left the office just really confused, and there were a number of reasons for it. The first one was I was so junior in the company that I knew in my heart that I hadn't been rude to anyone, I hadn't been disrespectful, and I didn't know enough to be arrogant. I had no leg to stand on to be arrogant, to be disrespectful to anyone. And I knew the way I had presented myself, I had always tried my best, especially as a junior. When you're learning in the company, it's a given. So I was confident of that. But secondly, I had been in the company for nearly 2 years at this point, and I had had appraisals, the major appraisals, at least twice a year. Not once had anyone raised any kind of issue to do with my attitude or the way they saw me. It hadn't come up. And aside from the appraisals, I also had at least weekly catch-ups with the supervisor that I worked with closely. And yet again, that my attitude was just never mentioned. It never came up. So I was just really, really, really confused. And even me trying to work out, okay, where would it have come from? Who would have said it? I also knew I didn't have any issue with anyone in the company. There was no tension with anyone. There were no bad vibes. The company was small enough that we all knew each other by face. If we didn't know each other by name, we knew each other by face. So yeah, I just knew I hadn't annoyed anyone to the point where, they're then going to give this feedback back to the senior manager. So yeah, just to give you some context, in that particular company, I was the first Black female of my role. So without doubt, there were a few people in that company where I was the first Black person they had ever worked with. Even though the company had been around for years, there were certain people that had just never worked with a Black female in my particular role. And just the culture of the company as well. Because I guess I was a new thing to some of the people that I worked with. I would get like certain questions. For instance, I was in the print room one day, and this was around the time where Kanye West had his breakdown, and one of the people in the company basically said to me, "Oh, what's going on with Kanye?" And I pretty much said, "I don't know. I don't know Kanye." There was another instance where I was listening to music whilst doing my work, and one of the people that I sat with basically said to me, "Oh, what are you listening to, Vanessa? Are you listening to some of that hip hop?" And I was like, "No, I'm listening to gospel music. There's nothing wrong with hip hop," but just the fact that it was hip hop music that came to him first. So yeah, that was like the environment of the company. That was just the way the people came across. So yeah, going back to this meeting, so I left really, really confused, not knowing what to do, really anxious and just alert, just because I didn't know where it came from. And so I ended up having a chat with my mentor. And initially before I said anything, he was just like, "Oh, what was the outcome of the meeting?" Just because he knew we had put together a really good proposal. And I said to him, "Actually, it's gone left." Now they've received some kind of negative feedback. There's an issue with my attitude, apparently. And instead, they're going to be monitoring my behavior. And literally, he went quiet for a moment. And he just said, "They're just trying to paint you as the angry Black girl. And we're not going to have any of it." But at the time, I just didn't want to jump to conclusions. So I took some time out. And then I decided to write an email to the same senior manager. And I, basically said, "Thank you, for your time. But I would appreciate it if you could let me know where this feedback came from. And if you can't let me know who it came from, at least let me know, what the incident actually was. What did I do in that situation? What did I do, and what would that person have expected me to do? What kind of behavior would they have expected me to carry out?" And essentially, I asked this just so I could use it as a learning curve, so I could progress from this, because I don't take those kind of things lightly, especially when it's someone that's essentially trying to defame your name. So I put it out in an email, clearly in bullet points. And yet again, I received radio silence, like nothing. Like days went by, and I didn't hear anything back. And at the same time, just because I didn't know where it come from, I went more into myself. I sat with a white woman, amazing woman. I shared an office with her at the time, and she started to notice that I had become more into myself. But at the same time, because I didn't know if the feedback had come from her, even though we had a really amazing relationship, I just didn't know where. So I didn't feel comfortable to ask her anything or tell her what was on my mind. So yeah, I just didn't trust anyone. And she basically asked me, she was just like, "Okay, Vanessa, what's going on? You seem a lot more quiet, like what's happening?" So I started to tell her the story, but slowly, just so I could gauge her reaction to see if she was like the informer. And then I realized from her response that it wasn't her. So I basically told her everything, and I was like, "This is the situation. Apparently there's been some kind of feedback on me. I'm being monitored. I don't know why, and I don't even know what I've done." And she literally said, "That's not right." And she was more disappointed at the fact that she had been my supervisor for, say, 5 to 6 months, like the most recent 5 to 6 months. And she had observed me for, we shared an office together, so she knew me. And she said no one had asked her anything. No one had gone to, ask feedback from her about me. And it would make sense that if you're going to seek feedback, you would seek feedback from the person that currently, supervises me. So yeah, she was absolutely clueless, and she literally said to me, don't worry, I'll sort it out. So she did her thing behind the scenes. I don't know what she did, but literally the week after, I received an email from the senior manager, and the senior manager basically said to me, "Oh, hi Vanessa, I've now received a stellar report about you. So we will be reconsidering your proposal for a secondment." Then they also said, "I just want to highlight that the feedback I initially received about you wasn't to do with your competency, and it wasn't to do with your work ethic." So in that same kind of breath, I had like mixed emotions, because in one sense I felt like vindicated, but in the second breath, the senior manager hadn't addressed any of my concerns. And what it showed me was that, yes, it was personal, because it wasn't about my work ethic and it wasn't about my competency levels. So it wasn't about how I applied myself to the job. It was solely about how someone had perceived me. It was solely about who I was, something I had done. But yet again, because he hadn't told me what I had done in that situation, it still left me confused. So following that, I think that situation really, it knocked my confidence. I didn't pursue it any further, but it really knocked my confidence, and it made me overthink every situation. It made me overthink how I come across. Even little things like staring at the computer screen, like I wear glasses. So if I'm squinting too hard, it's like, okay, am I screw facing? Okay, let me try and straighten my face. Like every little thing. And it's like, you don't want to come across too opinionated. You don't want to come across too loud. So I guess I started to become less of myself, like water and dilute myself. And unfortunately I've seen how it's followed me through. And I think the big thing also is just not being trusting of colleagues. The situation, as I said, really made me overthink. So in those days and weeks, I just started to question, I guess, you start to question how you come across. You start to question, just how you're perceived. And because I started to think, okay, maybe it is because I'm Black. And as I said, there were certain people there that had not ever worked with a Black person. So they saw the stereotypical image of a Black person. So that almost played in the back of my mind, like, let me not live up to that stereotype. Let me not live up to that stereotype. So yeah, again, you're overthinking. And when you're overthinking, you can't bring your full self. So for me, I've just never really been able to bring my full self to the professional working environment, just because there's that thing at the back of your mind that's saying, let me not fulfill their stereotype. Let me not be too much. Let me not say too much. In terms of the monitoring, I had no idea what that meant. My thing was, if the situation was that bad, if the feedback was that bad, I would have expected them to call me in a meeting. It shouldn't have taken me to go and ask about an email I'd sent for the senior manager to suddenly say, oh, this situation. But not once was it ever explained to me what I did and how I would be monitored. It was just, we've received negative feedback about your attitude, and I will be monitoring you. And I think, as I said, straight after I sent that email, but I didn't receive any kind of response about it. I didn't receive any kind of follow-up. Nothing was ever clarified to me, even up till this day. I still have the email on my phone, but nothing was ever clarified for me. So the relationship between myself and my mentor was just a blessing. Just an absolute blessing. He was the only Black male of his level in the company. So he got it. And I understood from him that he was just trying to look out for me. Plus, it was like my first time in that professional corporate space. And I was definitely like a rookie. I was a newbie to the game. So he would see certain things that I would do and he would pull up on me about it. So yeah, we had a very transparent, honest relationship where he would be able to give me that hard feedback, and yeah, I would just have to take it. But yeah, I think in essence, I would just go to him with my concerns, just try and pick his brain about things, just knowing that the talks with him was also a safe space, without judgment. And he could relate because he had gone through the system, he had gone through that same path, he had had his own setbacks, he had had his own, he had borne his own stripes going through the journey. So essentially, he supported me. The one thing that he always used to tell me was, it's a rat race, it's a dog-eat-dog world. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve, and don't get emotional. So I don't know if there's a difference between men and women. I don't know, but it was almost like, okay, this has happened. Your name has been vindicated, but you just need to focus on the goal. Don't get bogged down in this. Just keep it moving, really. As a junior, you don't really want to rock the boat too much. I would definitely say that not all, but certain corporate spaces don't allow you to feel. You pretty much do have to brush your shoulders off and just keep on going, keep it moving. But if I was given advice to myself, I would probably give them a space to feel, give them a space to be annoyed, give them a space to be angry, but at the same time, remind them that in a harsh way, people actually don't care. You can't actually be too emotional about it. I would have probably followed up more in hindsight. So giving advice to my younger self, I probably would have followed up in a polite way. But it's tricky because you're also keeping your eye and your mind on your long-term career in that company. And you don't want to be seen as the troublemaker, especially if you're a minority. So it's hard. It's definitely hard. But I think the culture of the company and all that does play a factor as well. Some companies are better than others. Some are more cutthroat. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Elize. I'm a diversity and inclusion advocate and work for a learning and development organisation that specialises in the design and delivery of structured mentoring programmes, inclusive leadership and development programmes working across different industries, including technology, media, banking and law, from small startups to global organisations. I personally feel invested in SixSafeSpaces as our stories need to be heard, and I want to support others through this journey of real change. Vanessa's story is one that we hear all too often. I'm disappointed that there was no resolution for Vanessa, who initially, full of energy and drive, lost trust within her work environment and her colleagues, felt like she had to be silent and kept to herself. I feel like Vanessa handled the experience in a positive way by utilising her network, but ultimately management failed to address the situation. What would have been the better outcome in this situation? Vanessa needed to understand where the feedback came from, what it was based on, and to have the opportunity to address it. Vanessa's manager should have checked in with her to ensure that a constructive conversation had taken place, and ideally, her manager should have been involved in that conversation to support her and, if necessary, escalate further, so for example to their HR department. In the Racism at Work report commissioned by the Trade Union Congress and published last year, responses show that over 70% of ethnic minority workers had experienced racial harassment at work in the last 5 years. Like Vanessa's story, over 40% of those who reported a racist incident said they were either ignored or they had been identified as a troublemaker. Today, I want to share some of my thoughts and some practical tips for managers and leaders who manage Black women or Black women who are facing similar situations, and everyone else who wants to play their part in identifying and removing racism within the workplace. I'm going to explore some key themes from Vanessa's story. Firstly, I'm going to talk about feedback. Feedback is considered the key to growth, and it's important to give it right. Managers and leaders have the responsibility to share feedback in the right way and upskill themselves on doing this properly. Through training, online resources available publicly for all of us, and through other organisations' resources. Feedback should always be given with positive intent to support the other person to grow and understand themselves better and focus on the future. Feedback should be shared to help us understand the impact we have. For this to be delivered effectively, feedback should be provided with clear, specific examples. If your manager shares vague feedback, ask questions, get examples, and find the evidence to support the message. Like Vanessa's story, this wasn't forthcoming on a number of occasions, and she was told she had a bad attitude and her senior manager would be keeping an eye on her. This feedback is deeply problematic and plays to the racist stereotype of the angry black woman. Organisations risk their black employees moulding themselves into something that feels palatable for others within the organisation, and they struggle to be their authentic self when such biased views are shared with no real evidence. This is where finding a safe space to reflect with others is so important. The power of mentoring is clear in Vanessa's story. She asked for a second perspective on the situation, and her mentor gave her the confidence to take further action. In moments like this, it's easy to reflect and doubt the severity of a situation, but actually talking it through with someone who you can trust, learn from, and be open with is so invaluable. Mentoring not only supports the mentee, but there's the reverse mentoring element, where the mentor gets an insight into a different world and perspective. Research shows that mentoring will empower you, open you up to new opportunities, and creates positive change for individuals. You may be wondering, how do I find a mentor? Mentoring can be informal, for example, catching up with a trusted colleague over a coffee or a friend, or more formal, where you've officially asked an individual to join you in a mentoring partnership. Firstly, I would suggest contact your HR department and see if your organisation has any structured mentoring schemes in place. There's also mentoring opportunities available online through LinkedIn and banks who support their customers and entrepreneurs, if you are one, with funding and business resources. We'll share some links with you in the description. Also, think about your own network. We'll share a link in the description to a framework that you can complete that will help you think about the people you currently surround yourself with and to help you identify who would be a good mentoring match. It's really important that you enter a mentoring partnership with someone you can trust. Set up that trust at the start, set your boundaries, and discuss confidentiality with each other. Ultimately, we need to stop hearing stories like this. If you do experience something similar, I hope this film will help you. Help you to identify when someone is being unjust, challenge biases confidently, find an empowering support network that will allow you to grow and ultimately be authentically you.